The water shimmered in shifting bands of blue and silver as Alex and Ryan slipped beneath the surface, the weight of the ocean pressing in around them. Sunlight filtered through the depths, illuminating the endless expanse of open water that stretched in every direction. Below them, the seafloor was a distant memory. This was the pelagic zone, where nothing but the deep and its unseen inhabitants lurked. Alex had spent years in these waters, learning their rhythm, their dangers. He had spearfished in the Pacific, the Atlantic, and even the Indian Ocean, always respecting the rules of the deep. But the ocean had no memory, no sense of fairness. The experience meant nothing to a force so vast, so indifferent. It could turn on you in an instant. They had set out early that morning, launching from the coast of Mexico, where the water was warm and rich with life. Their goal was tuna, fast, powerful, and notoriously difficult to land. Alex had done it many times before, but for Ryan, this was new territory. The younger man had trained for months, refining his technique, learning to hold his breath just a little longer, to move just a little quieter. He was eager and excited. They descended together, leveling out at about 60 feet. The world here was different, stripped of sound except for the rhythmic hiss of their own breath through their snorkels. Schools of fish moved like liquid shadows in the distance, shimmering and shifting as one. Alex scanned the blue, his grip firm on his spear gun. The hunt was patient work. Tuna were quick to spook, disappearing in a blink if approached too aggressively. The first sign of trouble came subtly, a shift in the water, a current that wasn't there before. It tugged at them, faint at first, then stronger, insistent. Alex noticed it, but they had trained for this. They would adjust, keep track of their position, and move accordingly. Then Ryan spotted his target, a sleek, torpedo-shaped tuna, its body flashing silver as it cruised through the open blue. Ryan moved instinctively, positioning himself and lining up the shot. Alex watched, hovering nearby. A beat of silence, the moment stretching, and then the sharp recoil of the spear gun as the shaft shot forward, striking true. For an instant, triumph. The tuna thrashed violently, its powerful tail sending up a cloud of bubbles. Ryan held on, his body straining against the pull, fighting to subdue the fish. Then the ocean changed. The blood spread quickly, blooming into the water like ink, and the reaction was immediate. A dark shape materialized from the void, fast, purposeful. Alex's mind registered it before his body could react. Oceanic whitetip. Not the biggest shark, but one of the most aggressive. A predator honed by millennia to respond to distress, to blood. It moved like a missile, no hesitation, no curiosity, just instinct. Ryan never had a chance. The shark struck him hard, jaws closing around his side in a brutal, twisting bite. The force sent them both spinning, with Ryan's body jerking violently. A burst of bubbles, a cloud of red. Alex's brain screamed at him to move, to do something, but it was happening too fast. His hands fumbled, lifting his spear gun, heart slamming against his ribs. He fired. The spear struck the shark's thick hide, but it barely registered. The shark thrashed, a flick of its tail sending a shockwave through the water. Ryan was still moving, his limbs flailing weakly, his mask knocked askew, eyes wide with terror. Blood trailed from the wound in dark ribbons, curling into the depths. The current was stronger now, pulling them further, deeper. Alex's lungs burned, screaming for air, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. He reached for Ryan, kicking forward, but the shark was still there, circling. It turned, a slow, dreadful roll of its massive body, then surged forward again. This time it dragged Ryan down. The scene dissolved into chaos. Ryan's body disappearing into the blue. There was just the shadow of the shark twisting, rolling, its powerful tail churning the water into a frenzy of movement and blood. Alex's vision blurred at the edges, his chest convulsed. The surface was too far. He had no choice. Kicking hard, he tore himself away, abandoning his friend to the deep. He broke through the surface with a gasp that was more like a sob, sucking in air in ragged, desperate gulps. The sky above was blinding and the ocean was endless. There was no sign of Ryan. His hands clutched at nothing. The boat was a distant shape, too far. He forced himself to wave, to scream, his voice hoarse and his body shaking. He kept looking back, waiting, hoping for Ryan to break the surface. Any second now, any second. But the ocean remained still. When the rescue boat reached him, strong arms pulled him aboard. He could barely process what was happening. The world blurred around him, voices distant, hands pressing against his shoulders, asking him questions he couldn't answer. Ryan was gone. The trip back to shore was slow. the hum of the engine droning against the silence that sat heavy in his chest. He stared at the water, the same water that had once felt like home, the same water that had swallowed his best friend whole. Guilt settled in like a weight that would never lift. He replayed it over and over. The moment the spear struck the tuna, the bloom of blood, the dark shape materializing from nothing. Could he have done something differently? Should he have stayed? Should he have fought harder? The nightmares came almost immediately. The feeling of drowning without ever going under. The sight of Ryan's body disappearing into the blue. His hands reaching, his eyes pleading. The sound of his own breath, too fast, too shallow, as he abandoned him. For weeks he could barely step into the water. Every ripple, every shadow beneath the surface sent ice through his veins. But he couldn't stay away forever. The ocean had taken something from him, but it had also been his life, and somehow he had to make sense of that. So he began to speak. He told people what had happened, sharing the raw truth, the brutality of the deep and the unpredictability of its predators. He spoke at diving schools, fishing expos, and conservation events. He shared the story of Ryan, the mistakes they had made, and the things they hadn't known. Not to scare them away, but to prepare them. Because the ocean wasn't cruel, it wasn't evil, it was simply what it was, a force beyond control, beyond reason. And if you entered its world, you had to understand the risk. Alex could never bring Ryan back, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep someone else from meeting the same fate. The first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting a golden shimmer over the restless waters of the South African coast. The waves rolled in steady sets, their peaks kissed by the morning glow, promising a perfect day for surfing. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and the distant cries of gulls circling above. It was the kind of morning that made the ocean feel alive, its power both inviting and untamed. Noah paddled out, muscles flexing against the resistance of the sea. At 17, he was already gaining recognition in the local surfing scene, his natural talent and fearless approach setting him apart. He lived for mornings like this. Before the crowds, before the noise, just him and the water. A few other surfers flanked him, friends who shared the same unspoken understanding of what it meant to chase waves at sunrise. The ocean was calm, deceptive in its serenity. Beneath the surface, unseen forces moved in silence, ancient and patient. Farther out, the deeper waters blended into a bottomless blue, concealing the world that lurked beneath. It was here, in the shadows of the unknown, that something stirred. Noah caught his first wave with effortless precision, his board carving through the water as he rode the glassy face. The rush was intoxicating, a fleeting moment of pure connection between man and nature. He kicked out just before the wave collapsed, already scanning for the next set. His heartbeat was steady, his mind clear. This was where he belonged. Then, the ocean changed. A sudden shift in energy, a presence, unseen but unmistakable. There was a ripple in the water where there should have been none. The kind of shift that wasn't just a trick of the light, but something real, something predatory. The morning sun cast long, distorted shadows beneath the surface, and somewhere in the depths, an apex predator had begun its ascent. The attack came without warning. From below, a force unlike anything Noah had ever known exploded into him, launching his body into the air as if he weighed nothing at all. The impact was sudden and violent. Time stretched, fragmented. For a brief, horrifying moment, he was airborne, weightless against the dawn sky. Then gravity pulled him down, and he hit the water hard. Pain. A searing, unbearable pain tore through his thigh. The water around him darkened instantly, a cloud of crimson spreading outward, mingling with the salt. His breath caught, his body instinctively tensing against the agony that ripped through him. The shark had latched onto his leg, its serrated teeth embedded deep into flesh and muscle. The world became chaos. Noah thrashed, instinct taking over. The shark twisted, dragging him downward, its massive body a force of nature far beyond his control. The pressure increased, jaws clamping down harder, pulling him into the abyss. His lungs burned as he fought to break free, but the power of the great white was absolute. Above, his friends had seen everything. Panic surged through them, but fear took a back seat to instinct. One of them turned his board toward the chaos, paddling furiously into the swirling blood. He didn't hesitate. A clenched fist crashed against the shark's snout. Desperation turned into action. Another surfer reached for Noah, grabbing him beneath the arms and pulling with every ounce of strength he had. The shark hesitated. The hit to its snout, the disruption of the struggle. It was enough. With one final bone-deep wrench of its head, it released Noah and disappeared into the murky depths, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Noah's body was limp as they dragged him onto a surfboard. His leg, what remained of it, was a mess of torn muscle and exposed bone. Blood pulsed freely into the water, the ocean swallowing it in hungry swirls. His skin was pale and his breaths were shallow. The others paddled with everything they had, their arms burning, their hearts hammering in their chests. The shoreline never felt farther away. On the beach, the early risers, runners, walkers, photographers, had noticed the commotion. A few sprinted toward the water, towels in hand, panic in their eyes. The second Noah was within reach, hands grabbed him, pulling him from the board and onto the wet sand. Someone pressed a towel against his thigh, trying to stem the bleeding. Another held his head, speaking words he barely registered. His mind drifted in and out, the world around him growing distant. The pain was excruciating, but it was fading, dissolving into something weightless. The sky above blurred, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore became a dull roar. Then sirens. Paramedics moved with urgency, assessing, stabilizing, and working against the ticking clock. The tourniquet was applied and the bleeding slowed, but the damage was done. The ride to the hospital was a blur, the sterile smell of the ambulance mixing with the coppery scent of his own blood. The surgery was inevitable. The decision was made quickly. There was no saving the leg. The bite had torn too deep, crushed too much. Hours later, when Noah opened his eyes in the hospital, the reality settled in. Where his leg had once been, there was nothing. The news spread fast. The footage, grainy but horrifying, surfaced online, capturing the moment the shark struck. The desperate rescue, the trail of blood left in the water. His story ignited conversations worldwide. The courage of his friends, the brutality of the ocean, the unpredictable balance of man and nature. It was all dissected, debated, and analyzed. But for Noah, none of that mattered. The loss was real, tangible. The life he had built, the dreams he had chased. What did they look like now? Surfing had been everything. And now he was just another name in a headline, another story of survival. Weeks passed. The pain lingered, but so did something else. A defiance, a refusal to let this be the end. The ocean had taken something from him, but it had not taken everything. He trained, he learned, and he adapted. He wasn't done. Months later, he returned to the water. The first paddle was the hardest, awkward, unfamiliar. But as he lay on his board, feeling the pull of the tide beneath him, something clicked. He wasn't afraid. The ocean was still his. His comeback became more than just a personal victory. It became a movement. He spoke at events, shared his story, and advocated for awareness. Not against sharks, but for understanding them. The ocean was not the enemy. Fear was. He became something more than he had ever expected. Not just a surfer or a survivor, but proof that even in the face of the unimaginable, resilience could triumph. And on the mornings when the sun broke over the horizon and the waves rolled in steady sets, he was there, waiting, ready. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath Madison Carter as she adjusted her camera, the lens capturing the expanse of deep blue surrounding her. Small reef sharks glided through the shallows, their sleek bodies casting shifting shadows across the sandy bottom. This was the kind of content her followers loved, raw, adrenaline-fueled, teetering on the edge of danger. She thrived on this. The thrill of risk, the rush of the unknown. Every stunt, every challenge, every carefully curated moment of danger propelled her further into the digital spotlight. She had swum with stingrays, cliff-dived into hidden cenotes, and faced down venomous snakes. Today was just another step towards cementing her status as the fearless queen of extreme adventure. The dive had started as planned. She and her dive buddy, a seasoned freediver named Hart, had set out early, chartering a small boat to a remote reef off the coast of Australia. The waters here were pristine, untouched by the crowded tourist spots she usually filmed in. She slipped into the ocean with practiced ease, the water cool against her skin as she descended, weightless, into the depths. Her camera, strapped to her wrist, recorded everything. The sway of the coral, the darting flashes of tropical fish, and the graceful movements of the reef sharks circling below. The views were pouring in. Comments flooded her live stream. She could already imagine the headlines, the boost in followers, the sponsorships, but she needed more, something bigger. She glanced toward the deeper waters beyond the reef's edge. The open ocean loomed, its dark expanse both terrifying and exhilarating. Without hesitation, she kicked forward, leaving the relative safety of the reef behind. Hart gestured for her to stay close, but she was already moving, chasing the perfect shot. The transition was immediate. The ocean floor disappeared, swallowed by an abyss that stretched endlessly downward. The silence was absolute. The sun's rays, so strong in the shallows, barely penetrated this far. Then it happened. A sudden violent jerk yanked her downward, a force so powerful it nearly wrenched the camera from her grip. Her body twisted, the movement unnatural, chaotic. For a split second, she didn't understand. Had she snagged herself on something? Had a current dragged her? Then the pain hit, searing, blinding, and radiating from her lower leg. The realization crashed into her like a wave of ice. Something had her, something big, She whipped her head around, and there it was, a bull shark. Its massive muscular body torqued through the water, its grip on her leg unrelenting. Blood erupted in a thick crimson cloud swirling upward, mixing with the deep blue. The shark's eyes, dark and expressionless, reflected nothing of the chaos unfolding. It did not hesitate. It did not question. It had her, and it was taking her. Her lungs burned as she thrashed, instinct driving her to fight. She twisted, reaching for the shark's gills, slamming her fists into them with every ounce of strength she had. The force barely registered. It only tightened its grip, the pressure of its jaws grinding against bone. The pain threatened to consume her, to pull her under completely, but she refused to let go. The water was everywhere, in her ears, in her throat, her vision blurred. She felt the shark shake its head, a predatory move meant to rip flesh, to incapacitate. Her body lurched violently with it, her muscles screaming in protest. She reached for her knife. It was strapped to her thigh, the same thigh that was locked in the jaws of the predator. Another violent shake, another explosion of pain. The world was shrinking, darkening at the edges. She felt her strength fading, the fight slipping from her limbs. The ocean, her stage, her playground, had turned against her. It was dragging her down, swallowing her whole. Then there was a movement, a streak of motion cutting through the water. Hart was there, and he fired a spear gun. The impact was immediate. The spear struck just behind the shark's eye. A glancing blow rather than a fatal one, but it was enough. The shark flinched, its grip loosening just slightly. It was the only chance she would get. With the last reserves of her strength, she wrenched her leg free, the jagged teeth tearing through flesh as she kicked backward. The pain was unimaginable, but she was moving, up, away. Hart grabbed her, his strong grip anchoring her to reality. Together they surged toward the surface, his powerful kicks doing what hers no longer could. The world above was impossibly far, her vision blurred. The weight of her injuries, the loss of blood, and the sheer exhaustion threatened to pull her back down. She fought to stay conscious, clinging to the instinct that had kept her alive this long. The surface shattered around them as they broke through. Hands pulled her onto the boat, voices distant, frantic. Her wetsuit was shredded, soaked in red. Her leg, torn apart, barely felt like her own. Everything spun. The pain, the cold, the reality of what had just happened slammed into her all at once. And then, nothing. She woke up in a hospital bed, her leg wrapped in gauze, machines beeping around her. The footage had gone viral. The world had watched her fight for her life. Some called her reckless, others brave, but none of it mattered, because she knew the truth now. The ocean was not a stage. The creatures she had once used for content were not props. She had been lucky, but luck had a limit. For the first time, she saw her reflection not as the fearless thrill-seeker, not as the social media icon, but as someone who had come dangerously close to being just another cautionary tale. She would not waste that chance. The next time the world saw her, it would not be for recklessness. It would be for something that mattered. Months passed. The scars on her leg were a constant reminder of the ocean's power. But they did not keep her away. Instead, they drove her forward. She studied, learned, and listened. She connected with marine biologists, conservationists, and freedivers who had spent their lives protecting the waters she had once taken for granted. Slowly, her platform changed. The thrill-seeking, danger-chasing persona faded, replaced by something else, something real. She began advocating for ocean conservation, using her reach to educate rather than to entertain. Morning waves rolled in smooth and glassy, the perfect swell for surfers to wake before dawn and race toward the ocean, boards in hand. The sky was clear and the Australian sun was warm despite the early hour, casting golden streaks over the vast blue. Seagulls drifted lazily overhead, their cries carried by the light breeze. The salty air mixed with the scent of sunscreen and seaweed, the familiar aroma of endless summer days. Jake Holloway had been surfing since he was 10, carving through waves with the ease of someone with salt water in his veins. At 16, the ocean was his second home, where time slowed, where nothing mattered but the next set rolling in. He paddled out, his arms slicing through the cool water, the rhythmic motion as natural as breathing. Out past the breakers, he straddled his board, waiting, watching, reading the ocean as he had done countless times before. The beach was only a hazy stretch of golden sand behind him, the distant hum of tourists and families barely registering. He felt the pull of the current, the rise and fall of the water beneath him, the anticipation of the next perfect wave. The sea was alive, shifting, restless. He could sense it, but what he didn't sense, what no one ever sensed until it was too late, was what lurked beneath. The bull shark had been moving through the shallows, drawn by the stir of activity, by the vibrations of paddling arms and kicking legs. It was built for ambush, a hunter sculpted by millions of years of evolution. its muscular body cutting through the water with silent precision. Unlike the great white, which often struck from below in powerful lunges, the bull shark preferred direct attacks, hitting its prey with sudden bone-crushing force. Jake never saw it coming. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. One moment he was weightless on his board. The next he was underwater, yanked down in a violent blur of bubbles and chaos. The pressure on his leg was unbearable, a crushing, searing agony as the shark's jaws clamped onto his thigh, its serrated teeth sawing through flesh. His mind barely had time to process what was happening before survival instincts kicked in. His hands flew to the source of the pain, reaching, pushing, fighting. The water around him was thick with blood, a dark cloud billowing in the shifting current. The shark's grip was iron, unyielding, pulling him deeper, rolling with him, trying to drown him before finishing the job. Jake's lungs screamed for air and his vision blurred with the sting of salt and blood. He struck out blindly, his fists hammering against the shark's rough snout, his blows weak against the predator's sheer power. The shark twisted, thrashing violently, its muscular body whipping through the water with deadly force. Desperation fueled him. His fingers scrambled against the creature's slick skin, finding its gills, soft, vulnerable slits just behind its massive head. He dug in with everything he had, his nails scraping, clawing. The response was instant. The shark recoiled, its grip loosening just enough. Jake tore himself free. The pain was blinding. His leg was shredded, hot pulses of agony searing through his body as he kicked hard, propelling himself upward toward the distant shimmer of sunlight. His chest burned, his lungs aching for air as he broke the surface in a gasping, desperate gulp. The shore had never seemed so far. His board was floating nearby, drifting in the blood-streaked water. He lunged for it, his arms shaking, muscles screaming in protest. Climbing onto it felt impossible. His body weakened, the adrenaline barely keeping him from collapsing. But he forced himself up, sprawled across the deck, his fingers clawing at the waxed surface. Then he paddled. Every stroke sent fresh waves of pain lancing through his leg, the torn flesh trailing ribbons of red in his wake. He could feel the weight of the ocean pulling at him, the eerie, lingering fear that the shark was still there, still circling, still hungry. But there was no time to look back. He focused only on the beach, on the people who were just beginning to notice something was wrong. The last few meters were the hardest. His strength was draining, his arms were trembling, and his vision dimmed at the edges. The shallows welcomed him with soft, rolling waves, the water thinning beneath him as he reached the sand. Strong hands suddenly grabbed him, pulling him onto the shore, and voices rose in urgent panic. Towels wrapped tightly around his leg, pressing down, trying to stop the blood. The pain was unbearable now, no longer masked by the chaos of the fight. His body felt cold despite the heat, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion settling in. His head lolled back against the sand, his chest heaving. The sky above was impossibly blue, the sun warm against his skin. Then darkness. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and gauze, and the steady beep of monitors were the first sounds registered when he woke. The surgeons had worked for hours, fighting to save his leg, to repair the damage done by the shark's crushing bite. They had succeeded, but the scars would remain, jagged, deep reminders of the battle he had fought beneath the waves. Recovery was slow and agonizing. Every movement reminded him of the moment his world had turned red, of the sheer force of nature he had faced. The fear lingered, creeping into his dreams, filling them with phantom pain and the suffocating press of water. But the ocean still called to him. Months later, he stood at the water's edge again, his board under his arm, the waves rolling in as they always had, indifferent to what had happened. The scars on his leg were still raw, a roadmap of survival carved into his skin. He ran his fingers over them absently, feeling the raised ridges, the uneven texture. The fear was there, but so was something else. Respect. The shark had been doing what it was meant to do. It hadn't been personal. It had been instinct, survival, and he had survived too. The water felt the same as before, cool, familiar, endless. He paddled out, his strokes strong, steady, cutting through the surface with the ease of someone who belonged there. The past could not erase the love he had for the ocean. It was his world too. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, a rolling expanse of blue that held both beauty and danger in its depths. Evan Carter floated just below the surface, body weightless in the warm Hawaiian waters, the sunlight dancing in fractured ribbons across the ocean floor. The rhythmic pull of the tide rocked him slightly, but he remained still, waiting. His heartbeat slowed, and his focus sharpened. He was spearfishing, a discipline that demanded patience and precision. The world above faded away. All that mattered was the silent hunt beneath. The morning had been calm and the conditions were perfect. The sea was clear, offering visibility for nearly 60 feet. Fish darted below in shimmering schools, their scales glinting like slivers of silver as they twisted and turned in synchronized movements. Evan had been diving for nearly an hour, his stringer already heavy with his catch. A good day's work. But as he adjusted his grip on his spear gun and prepared to make one last dive, something changed in the water. It was initially subtle, just a feeling, a whisper of movement in the periphery. The fish, once abundant and lively, scattered in an instant. The reef, once alive with color and motion, fell unnervingly still. Evan's instincts flared, his pulse spiking despite his controlled breathing. He turned slowly, scanning the deep blue, and then he saw it. A tiger shark, massive and unmistakable, emerged from the depths like a ghost. It moved with an eerie, effortless grace, its broad head swaying slightly as it closed the distance between them. Evan exhaled slowly through his nose, willing himself to stay calm. It wasn't unusual to encounter sharks while spearfishing, and most of the time they were more curious than aggressive. But this one was different. It wasn't just investigating, it was hunting. The fish on his stringer, that was the problem. The scent of blood had called the predator from the deep, and now it had found the source. Evan started moving toward the surface, keeping his eyes locked on the approaching shark. It was big, at least 12 feet, its striped body rippling as it closed the distance with unnerving speed. He tightened his grip on the spear gun. He had to get to the boat. Then, without warning, the shark attacked. A sudden surge of power, a burst of movement, and it was on him. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. Teeth sank into his arm, crushing muscle and bone with terrifying force. Pain erupted through his body, white-hot and all-consuming. The world tilted as he was yanked downward, water rushing past his face, his blood billowing in a dark, expanding cloud. Instinct took over. His free hand scrabbled against the shark's rough hide, fingers grasping for anything to fight back. His vision blurred as he struggled, the need for oxygen burning in his lungs like fire. The pressure increased as the shark dragged him deeper, its powerful tail propelling them into the abyss. Evan fought with everything he had, his body twisted, legs kicking furiously against the pull. The weight of his spear gun was still in his hand, and in a desperate surge of motion he drove it forward. The tip of the gun slammed into the shark's eye socket, a brutal, forceful strike. The reaction was instant. The shark thrashed violently, releasing its grip just long enough for Evan to tear himself free. He didn't hesitate. Pain screamed through his body, but survival drowned out everything else. He kicked hard, his legs burning as he fought to reach the surface. The light above seemed impossibly far away. The world blurred, black edges creeping into his vision. His lungs convulsed, his body demanding air he didn't have. But he kept going. Stroke after stroke, desperate and wild, pushing through the agony, through the blood, through the terror. Then air. He broke the surface with a gasp, lungs seizing as he sucked in the life-saving oxygen. His vision swam, the sky blindingly bright. The boat was close. His diving partner was already reaching for him, strong hands grabbing his shredded wetsuit, hauling him aboard. The pain in his arm was excruciating now, his blood pooling across the deck, staining the white fiberglass in deep crimson streaks. The wound was horrific. Flesh torn, muscle shredded, bone possibly exposed. His wetsuit clung in tatters to the ruined limb. He pressed his good hand against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding, but it was everywhere, dripping from his fingers, pooling beneath him, soaking into the deck. The adrenaline kept him upright, but the edges of his vision wavered, threatening to pull him into unconsciousness. The boat roared to life, the engine straining as it sped toward shore. Every second stretched endlessly, each wave jarring his injured body, sending fresh waves of agony through his shredded arm. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, his breath ragged, his vision tunneling. The world blurred between reality and fading consciousness. But one thought remained clear. He was alive. The next hours were a haze, the rush to shore. The paramedics were waiting at the dock. The blinding hospital lights, the whirlwind of doctors, the sharp sting of needles, the suffocating weight of pain. Time folded in on itself, days slipping past in a blur of medication and surgery. The damage was extensive. Nerve damage, torn tendons, bone fractures. The surgeons fought to save the arm, working for hours to repair the devastation the shark had left behind. And they succeeded, just barely. The road to recovery was long and agonizing. Every movement was a battle, Every physical therapy session a war. The strength that had once been second nature was gone, and rebuilding it was a slow, grueling process. But he fought. Months passed. The scars healed, though they would never fade completely. Once nearly taken by the sea, his arm regained function, though it would never be the same. The ocean still called to him, the pull of the deep still strong. But he knew now more than ever what waited in the depths. The afternoon sun hung low in the Florida sky on September 18, 2023, casting long streaks of light over the calm water. The ocean stretched endlessly around Carl Peterson's small fishing boat, rippling gently as the tide pulled lazily beneath him. It had been an uneventful morning of casting lines and waiting, but Carl didn't mind. He had always enjoyed the solitude of the sea, the slow rhythm of the waves against the hull, and the occasional tug on his fishing rod, which kept him hopeful. His friend Mark sat at the opposite end of the boat, dozing lightly under the shade of his cap. They had been out for hours, the heat pressing down on them, the kind of sticky, unrelenting warmth that made even a sip of beer refreshing. Carl removed his hat and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. A sudden gust of wind swept across the water, catching the fabric and yanking it from his fingers. He reached, but it was gone instantly, tumbling end over end before landing with a soft plop on the surface. He stared at it momentarily, floating a few feet away, the familiar dark green brim bobbing on the gentle swells. That hat had been with him for years, his lucky fishing hat, which he wore on every trip. He knew he shouldn't care so much about a piece of fabric, but sentimentality had its way of creeping into the smallest things. Without hesitation, Carl stood and swung his legs over the side of the boat. He barely thought about it. The water was warm and inviting. He had done this plenty of times. He could return to the ship in seconds, his hat retrieved, the day carrying on as if nothing had happened. The moment his body hit the water, he felt the difference. On the boat, the sea had seemed still, almost tranquil. But in the water, it was alive, moving around him, pressing against his skin with a silent, unrelenting presence. He kicked forward, reaching for the hat as it drifted beyond his grasp. Then, without warning, the water erupted. A force struck his leg like a sledgehammer, a sudden crushing grip that sent shockwaves of pain shooting through his entire body. His mind barely had time to process what was happening before he was yanked downward, water rushing over his head as he was dragged below the surface. Instinct kicked in, pure animal panic surging through his veins. His arms flailed, his body twisted, but the grip on his leg only tightened. A deep, wrenching pressure tore through him as the bull shark's teeth buried deeper, mercilessly sawing into flesh and bone. Once so clear, the water clouded instantly with a bloom of deep red swirling around him like ink spilled in a current. His chest burned, his lungs screaming for air as he fought against the relentless force pulling him down. He tried to kick, but the pain was blinding, white-hot and searing, his muscles refusing to respond. The bull shark twisted violently, a brutal primal motion meant to rip and tear. His body followed the motion unwillingly, his leg wrenching in a way no human body was meant to bend. Above, the surface shimmered, tauntingly close yet impossibly far. The world above continued as if nothing had changed. The same golden light filtering through the water, the same lazy swells rolling past. But down here in the depths, it was a different world governed by instinct and hunger. His fingers clawed at the water, desperate for something to hold or anchor himself to. The pain in his leg was unbearable now, waves of agony rolling through him with each thrash of the beast that held him. His mind fought to focus, to cling to something other than the mind-numbing terror threatening to consume him. Then a flash of movement. Something splashed above, his friend Mark throwing a life preserver. The bright orange ring cut through the water, bobbing just feet away. The sight sent a surge of adrenaline through Carl's veins, pushing back the creeping edges of unconsciousness. He reached for it, straining with every ounce of strength left in his battered body. The bull shark responded instantly. Another violent shake, another wrenching twist, and the world spun around him. Something tore, a deep, sickening rip before the grip on his leg loosened. He kicked instinctively, his body thrashing toward the surface, lungs burning for air. But the water was thick now, filled with the metallic scent of his blood. His movements were sluggish, his body heavy. The surface, so agonizingly close, shimmered just beyond his reach. His fingers stretched toward it, grasping for something solid, something real. Then another force, a second impact, a sharp tug pulled him back. The bull shark hadn't given up. It struck again, jaws clamping onto what remained of his leg, dragging him down with renewed fury. The last of his breath exploded from his lungs in a silent scream as he was yanked into the depths once more. The world grew darker, the light above fading as his strength bled away. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattering like leaves caught in a storm. The pain dulled, a distant, almost disconnected sensation now. His arms, once flailing, slowed, his body surrendering to the inevitable pull of the deep. Above, the boat drifted, the life preserver floating uselessly on the surface. The ocean swallowed the last ripples of the struggle, smoothing over as if nothing had happened. An hour later, the Coast Guard arrived. The boat rocked gently in the afternoon breeze. Mark standing at the edge, staring at the empty water. The search was swift and efficient, but fruitless. There was no sign of Carl, nobody, no movement beneath the surface. Only remnants remained. Shreds of fabric drifted in the water. Pieces of a shirt torn apart by the struggle. A single smear of blood stained the waves, slowly dissipating with the tide. And there, floating eerily on the surface, was Carl's hat. It bobbed in the water as if waiting, unaware its owner would never reach for it again. Off the coast of Florida had always been unpredictable. For the United States Coast Guard, this stretch of ocean was both a workplace and a battlefield. Strong currents, unexpected storms, and sudden emergencies were all part of the job. The Gulf Stream ran through these waters, bringing warm currents and a rich variety of marine life. Fishermen, tourists, and sailors passed through daily, unaware of the dangers lurking below. Sharks, especially great whites, had always been a known presence, but attacks were rare. The ocean followed its own rules, and on February 25, 2025, those rules changed in the most violent way. That morning, the crew of the United States Coast Guard Sentinel, a 45-foot response boat, had been assigned a routine patrol and search mission. A small fishing vessel had sent a distress call the night before, but had gone silent before giving exact coordinates. The Coast Guard needed to investigate, ensuring that the boat and anyone on board were safe. Petty Officer First Class Daniel Mercer, 34, was leading the four-man team. He had spent more than a decade with the Coast Guard and had seen almost everything: rescue missions and hurricanes, drug interceptions, and capsized vessels. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what was coming. Alongside him were boatswain's mate Travis Reed, 29, a tough, capable seaman with years of experience; machinery technician Hector Alvarez, 31, the team's engine and equipment expert; and seaman Jack Torrance, 25, the youngest member of the crew. This was supposed to be a simple mission: scan the area, check for any wreckage, and report back. By noon, the Sentinel had reached the location where the distress call had been last recorded. The waters were calm, too calm. They expected to see debris or an empty boat drifting. Instead, there was nothing. Mercer stood at the helm, scanning the horizon with binoculars. Travis monitored the radar, trying to pick up any signals. Hector ran a final check on the engines while Jack secured the rescue equipment. Then something hit the boat. It was sudden, an enormous impact from below. The entire vessel lurched, sending Travis stumbling against the console. Jack, standing near the edge, barely had time to grab onto a railing before nearly losing his balance. Hector swore as tools clattered to the deck. Mercer gripped the wheel, steadying the boat. Then it happened again, a second, more violent strike. This time the boat rocked hard to the side. Jack lost his footing. His hands grasped at the air, reaching for something, anything. But he missed. He went overboard. The crew barely had time to react. One moment, Jack was on the deck, and the next, he was in the water. The ocean swallowed him instantly. For a split second, there was silence. Then the water beneath Jack exploded. An enormous great white shark, at least 18 feet long, emerged with terrifying speed. It came from directly below, its massive jaws clamping down on Jack's torso. The force of the bite lifted him out of the water, his body caught in the predator's grip. His scream was brief, cut short by the crushing power of the shark's jaws. Blood sprayed into the air, mixing with the seawater. The shark twisted violently, dragging Jack under. On the Sentinel, chaos erupted. Mercer grabbed the radio, calling for emergency support. Hector ran for a rifle stored in the cabin. Travis, without thinking, rushed to the side of the boat, reaching for Jack, but there was nothing to grab. Jack was gone. Beneath the surface, the shark thrashed, the water turning red. For a moment, it seemed like the attack was over. but then it resurfaced. Jack's body was still in its jaws, limp, torn. The shark bit down again, shaking its prey before pulling him deeper. Travis fired a flare into the water, trying to startle the shark. It had no effect. Hector raised the rifle, aiming carefully, waiting for a clear shot. The shark circled beneath the surface, its outline barely visible in the blood-clouded water. When it came up again, Hector pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out over the waves. The bullet hit near the shark's dorsal fin, causing it to thrash wildly. But it didn't leave. Instead, it turned sharply, as if angered, and swam directly toward the boat. It rammed the hull again. This time, cracks appeared in the fiberglass. The Sentinel was taking damage. Mercer ordered the engines to full power. They had to get out of there. Jack was gone. There was nothing more they could do. The shark followed for a moment, its fin cutting through the water like a knife. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the depths. The crew was silent. The reality of what had happened settled in. Jack Torrance, the youngest member of their team, was gone, taken in seconds, lost to the ocean. They turned the boat around and headed back to base, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. The Coast Guard had always known the risks of the sea. But this was different. This wasn't a storm or an accident. This was an attack. And no one on that boat would ever forget it. The Alaskan fishing industry had always been unforgiving, with freezing temperatures, unpredictable storms, and dangerous waters filled with some of the largest marine predators in the world. Fishermen who worked these waters had to be tough, experienced, and always prepared for the unexpected. On April 3, 2023, what was supposed to be a routine halibut fishing trip turned into a nightmare for Captain Mike Lawson and his crew. Their boat, the Northern Star, was built to withstand rough seas, but nothing could have prepared them for the violent attack that came from beneath the surface that day. Mike had been fishing these waters for over 20 years, leading crews on trips that lasted days, sometimes weeks at a time. He knew every risk, from sudden storms to rogue waves, but he had never encountered anything like what was waiting for them that morning. Alongside him were his longtime first mate, Danny Wilkes, an experienced fisherman who had been with him for over a decade, Mark Reynolds, the boat's mechanic and deckhand, and Jake Carter, the youngest of the crew at 29, who was eager to prove himself. The day started off like any other, with the crew preparing the boat at the Dutch Harbor dock before heading out into the open sea. The forecast was clear, and there were no warnings about rough conditions. The crew spent the first few hours of the morning setting up their lines, hauling in their first catches and monitoring the radar for any signs of large schools of fish. The waters off the coast of Alaska were home to an abundance of marine life, including pods of orcas that were known to follow fishing boats hoping for discarded scraps. Seeing orcas was common, but they had never been a problem before. As the boat drifted through the cold waters, the crew noticed movement in the distance. A group of orcas had appeared, their black and white bodies slicing through the water with precision. At first, the men paid little attention. It was normal for orcas to follow fishing vessels, sometimes even stealing fish from the lines. But something felt different about this group. The way they moved was not like the orcas they had seen before. These were not just passing by. They were circling, watching. Mike kept an eye on them while continuing the operation, pulling in the latest haul. Then, without warning, a violent jolt shook the boat. The impact was so strong that it sent Jake stumbling backward, nearly knocking him overboard. The crew scrambled to regain balance, gripping the railings and looking around in confusion. The boat had been hit by something powerful. Before they could react, another impact slammed into the hull, this time harder. The sound of cracking wood echoed through the air as the boat lurched to one side. Mike's heart pounded as he realized that something was deliberately attacking them. He shouted for Danny to check the damage while Mark rushed below deck to assess if water was coming in. Then the orca surfaced. It was massive, larger than any they had ever seen. It swam close enough that they could see its eyes, dark and focused. It was not just investigating, it was targeting them. Without hesitation, it dove again, disappearing beneath the surface. The crew barely had time to process what was happening before the next hit came, this time even more forceful. The hull groaned under the pressure as another crack appeared along the side of the boat. Danny tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and stalled. The last impact had done more damage than they thought. Mark shouted from below deck that water was seeping in fast. They were taking on water, and if they didn't get the engine running, they would be stranded. The orca was not finished. It surfaced again, moving alongside the boat before turning sharply and ramming into the stern. The force lifted the back end momentarily before slamming it back down. Jake, who had been securing the fishing lines, lost his grip and crashed against the deck, gasping as the wind was knocked out of him. He struggled to get up, his hands slipping on the wet wood. Mike grabbed the radio and sent out a distress signal, hoping that someone nearby would pick it up. The signal was weak, and they were too far out for an immediate response. They were alone with a sinking boat and a predator that seemed intent on finishing the job. The next attack was the most devastating. The orca struck the boat head-on, causing the entire vessel to shudder. The crack in the hull widened, and cold seawater rushed in. The men knew they had to abandon ship before it was too late. Mike gave the order to grab life vests and prepare to deploy the emergency raft. As they rushed to secure what little they could, the orca came back for one final blow. It hit the stern with enough force to send a wave over the deck, nearly washing Jake and Danny overboard. The boat tilted dangerously, its fate sealed. The crew had no choice but to jump into the freezing water and swim toward the emergency raft, which was barely staying afloat. For a moment, the orca disappeared, leaving only silence. The men paddled desperately, their breath coming in short gasps as the icy water sapped their strength. They reached the raft and pulled themselves in, shivering, their eyes scanning the water for any sign of the predator. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the attack was over. The orca was gone. The men sat in stunned silence, watching as the Northern Star listed to one side before disappearing beneath the waves. Their boat, their equipment, everything they had worked for, was gone. Hours later, a nearby fishing vessel, the Silver Tide, responded to their distress call and pulled them from the water. The crew was exhausted, physically and mentally drained from what they had just survived. They had seen orcas before, but never like this. The attack left more questions than answers. Scientists had long studied orcas and knew them to be intelligent and highly social creatures, but this level of aggression toward a boat was almost unheard of. The fishermen who survived that day would never look at the ocean the same way again. Beaches along Florida's Gulf Coast had always been a favorite destination for families looking to enjoy the warm waters and soft sand. On June 18, 2022, Sarah Carter took her 10-year-old son, Ethan, to Clearwater Beach for what was supposed to be a relaxing day under the sun. It was a typical summer afternoon with tourists setting up umbrellas, children building sandcastles, and waves gently rolling onto the shore. The ocean looked inviting, and Ethan had been eager to get into the water as soon as they arrived. Sarah watched as her son ran toward the waves, his excitement clear in every step. He had always loved the ocean, unafraid of the vastness that stretched before him. She spread out a beach towel, placed their cooler beside her, and sat down to keep a close eye on him. The shoreline was shallow, the water reaching only up to Ethan's waist as he played. Other children swam nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of seagulls flying overhead. The Gulf of Mexico was known for its rich marine life, home to dolphins, sea turtles, and a variety of fish species. It was also home to sharks, though attacks in the area were rare. Bull sharks, in particular, were often seen in these waters, known for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt and fresh water. Unlike other shark species that preferred deep ocean waters, bull sharks were comfortable venturing into shallow coastal areas, sometimes coming alarmingly close to swimmers. Ethan continued splashing, unaware that beneath the surface something had been watching. A 12-foot bull shark had been swimming nearby, drawn by the movement in the water. It moved silently, its powerful body cutting through the currents. Unlike people on the beach, the shark wasn't playing. It was hunting. Sarah leaned back on her elbows, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her skin. She glanced at Ethan every few seconds, feeling a sense of peace as she watched him enjoy himself. Then something shifted. The people near the water's edge started pointing toward the ocean. Their faces turned from amusement to concern. Sarah sat up, her body tensing. The water around Ethan had darkened, rippling unnaturally. Before she could fully process what was happening, the shark struck. The attack happened in an instant. The massive bull shark lunged at Ethan, clamping its jaws around his leg with terrifying force. A piercing scream cut through the air as the water turned red. Ethan thrashed, his small body helpless against the powerful predator pulling him deeper. Sarah's heart stopped. Her instincts screamed at her to run into the water, but her legs refused to move. The helplessness was unbearable. Every muscle in her body was locked in terror as she watched her son being dragged away. On the beach, people reacted in shock, some screaming, others frozen in disbelief. A man reached for his phone, calling 911, while a group of tourists stood at the edge of the water, unsure of what to do. Then, from the lifeguard station, someone was already moving. Kyle Harrison, a 25-year-old lifeguard, had been scanning the beach from his post when he heard the first screams. His training kicked in before he even fully understood the situation. Grabbing a rescue buoy, he sprinted toward the water, pushing through the waves with every ounce of strength he had. The shark, still latched onto Ethan's leg, dragged him further from shore. The boy's arms flailed, his cries breaking through the crashing waves. Blood swirled around him, attracting even more attention from beachgoers who could do nothing but watch in horror. Kyle reached Ethan in seconds, but the shark wasn't letting go. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Kyle swung the buoy, slamming it against the predator's snout. The impact startled the shark, causing it to release its grip for a brief moment. Wasting no time, Kyle grabbed Ethan, wrapping an arm around his chest and pulling him toward shore. The boy's body was limp, his face pale from shock and blood loss. The bull shark wasn't finished. It circled back, preparing for another strike. Kyle kicked hard, pushing toward the shallows. He knew he had only seconds before the predator returned. On the shore, 2 other lifeguards had rushed into the water to help. They met Kyle halfway, lifting Ethan between them and carrying him to the sand. Sarah collapsed next to her son, her hands trembling as she reached for him. His leg was torn open, deep wounds exposing flesh and muscle. Blood poured onto the sand, the stark red staining the golden beach. The crowd surrounded them, some crying, others praying. A woman offered her towel, pressing it against Ethan's leg in an attempt to stop the bleeding. The sirens of an approaching ambulance echoed through the air. Kyle stayed by Ethan's side, his hands covered in blood, his mind racing with everything he had just witnessed. He had been a lifeguard for years, trained in rescues of all kinds, but nothing had prepared him for this. He had never faced a shark attack before. The weight of what had just happened sat heavy on his chest. The paramedics arrived, quickly assessing Ethan's condition. They secured his leg, working to control the bleeding as they loaded him onto a stretcher. Sarah climbed into the ambulance with him, her fingers gripping his hand tightly. She couldn't stop shaking. As the ambulance sped away, the beach remained silent. The attack had lasted only minutes, but the horror of it would be remembered forever. The water, once a place of joy and laughter, now carried an air of fear. People hesitated before stepping in, glancing around as if expecting another shadow to appear beneath the waves. Kyle stood near the shoreline, his gaze fixed on the ocean. Somewhere out there, the bull shark had disappeared into the depths, its hunger momentarily satisfied. He knew sharks weren't evil, that they were just acting on instinct, but the reality of what had just happened made that knowledge hard to accept. Ethan survived the attack, though his injuries were severe. His leg required multiple surgeries, and the road to recovery would be long. But he was alive thanks to the quick actions of a lifeguard who had risked everything to save him. The attack sent shockwaves through the community, reigniting debates about beach safety and the increasing number of shark encounters in shallow waters. Scientists studied the incident, trying to understand what had provoked the bull shark's aggression. Some believed it was a case of mistaken identity, that the shark had thought Ethan was prey. Others warned that sharks were becoming bolder, their habitats changing due to climate shifts and human activity. For Sarah, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that her son had survived. But the image of that massive predator, the sight of her child being dragged beneath the waves, would haunt her forever. The ocean stretched endlessly, a vast, shifting expanse of blue that shimmered under the morning sun. March 13, 2025 was warm and clear, the kind of day Sofia Petrova lived for. The water off the coast of Western Australia was particularly inviting, its surface calm, and its depths illuminated by beams of light that pierced through like golden spears. It was perfect for what she had planned. Sofia had made a name for herself in the world of underwater performance. At 29, she was one of the most renowned professional mermaid performers, blending freediving mastery with an ethereal grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Her custom silicone mermaid tail was a seamless extension of her body, a stunning creation that moved as fluidly as any sea creature. She could glide through the water in mesmerizing arcs, her breath control so honed that she seemed to exist in an entirely different realm, one where time slowed and gravity lost its hold. This shoot was supposed to be one of her most breathtaking yet. The open ocean was a far cry from the controlled environments of aquariums and pools, but that was exactly why she loved it. The unpredictability, the rawness, the feeling of being completely immersed in nature. It was exhilarating. The risks, of course, were real, but Sophia was no stranger to them. She had trained relentlessly, her lungs capable of holding breath for minutes at a time, her body conditioned to withstand the pressure of the deep. Her team had set out early, their small boat cutting through the waves as they reached the designated filming spot. It was an isolated area, chosen specifically for its crystal-clear water and striking underwater topography. But it was also known for something else: sharks. The great whites that patrolled these waters were among the largest in the world, apex predators that moved with ancient, effortless power. She was aware of them. She had swum in shark-inhabited waters before, always careful, always mindful. But she had never encountered one this close, not until now. As she descended, the water embraced her, cool and welcoming. She moved with practiced elegance, her body undulating with each flick of her shimmering tail. Schools of fish scattered in synchronized bursts, their scales catching the light. The deep below was endless, an abyss of unknown shadows. But she was comfortable here. This was her element. She did not see it at first. The great white came from below, its massive form a ghostly silhouette rising through the blue. It was nearly 16 feet long, a powerhouse of muscle and instinct, drawn by the unusual movement above. The tail Sophia wore, though beautiful, mimicked something else entirely in the eyes of the predator, an injured, struggling animal. The shimmering, erratic flicks of light bouncing off its surface were signals of distress, of vulnerability. The shark reacted in the only way it knew how. A single flick of its tail propelled it upward with shocking speed. The distance closed in seconds. The ocean, so serene only moments ago, became a battleground. She felt it before she saw it. The shift in the water, the sudden surge of force. Then, in a blur of pale white and jagged motion, it struck. The impact was brutal. The shark's jaws clamped around her torso, its serrated teeth slicing effortlessly through the thin fabric of her diving top, through the skin, through muscle. The force alone was overwhelming, crushing, dragging her violently downward. Her world became a maelstrom of blood and bubbles, of writhing limbs and unimaginable pain. Her body twisted instinctively, every survival instinct firing at once. Her hands clawed at the shark's snout, pressing against its eyes, its gills. Anything to make it release. But its grip was merciless. It shook her, the sheer power of the motion snapping through her ribs, her spine, like a rag doll caught in the teeth of a beast. Above, the boat erupted into chaos. Her team had seen the attack unfold in horrific clarity, their voices lost against the vast ocean. A scramble of movement, screaming, pointing, emergency calls. But they were powerless. Sophia was gone. She fought. Even in agony, even as the blood clouded her vision, she fought. Her lungs burned and her body screamed for air. But the deep was swallowing her whole. The shark dragged her further down, its instincts primal, unyielding. It was not personal. It was not cruel. It was survival. The light from above dimmed, the surface becoming a distorted, unreachable dream. And then the struggle ended. The ocean fell into stillness once more. The currents carried only ribbons of red that faded into the depths. She never resurfaced. For hours, search efforts continued, the team desperate, divers plunging into the water, scanning, hoping. But they found nothing. No sign of her. No remnants of the dreamlike figure who had once danced so effortlessly beneath the waves. The ocean had taken her, as it had taken so many before. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves around the world. Videos of Sophia's past performances, her breathtaking underwater routines, her dazzling mermaid persona, circulated across social media, now carrying a haunting weight. She had blurred the line between fantasy and reality. And in the end, the ocean had reminded everyone of its unchanging truth. Experts weighed in, dissecting the tragedy. Some pointed to the dangers of freediving in open waters, the unpredictability of marine predators, and the risks of appearing like prey in a realm where humans did not belong. Others mourn her loss as an artist, a woman who had made the impossible seem real, who had lived for the water until it claimed her. Debates raged about safety regulations, about whether such performances should even be attempted in the wild, but none of it changed the outcome. The ocean remained as it always had, untamed, indifferent. Days passed, then weeks. Memorials were held, tributes written. Her name whispered like a legend, a cautionary tale of beauty and peril. Some swore they would never enter the water again, haunted by the knowledge of what had happened beneath the waves. Others, fellow freedivers and performers, continued, honoring her in the only way they knew how, by embracing the ocean's depths, despite its dangers. Somewhere beneath the waves, where light fades and silence reigns, Sofia Petrova's final dive lingers, waiting for someone to find her. But the ocean does not give back what it has taken. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of deep blue merging with the fiery glow of the setting sun. The secluded island had been everything they had dreamed of: pristine beaches, swaying palms, and the kind of quiet that felt untouched by time. Mark and Lisa had arrived 3 days earlier, reveling in the solitude, the sense of having paradise to themselves. The locals had been friendly but cautious, their smiles laced with unspoken warnings. They spoke of strong currents, unpredictable waters, and most of all, the presence of sharks. Mark had listened, nodding politely, but he wasn't concerned. He was an experienced diver, comfortable in the water, and Lisa trusted him completely. This was their honeymoon, a time for adventure, not fear. The beach where they now stood was postcard perfect. The sand, still warm from the day's heat, felt soft beneath their feet as they walked toward the waves. The tide lapped gently at the shore, the water impossibly clear. Schools of tiny fish flickered beneath the surface, and beyond them, deeper still, darker shadows hinted at the mysteries below. They waded in, the coolness of the water sending a brief shiver through their sun-warmed skin. The world became weightless as they swam farther, their bodies slicing through the water with practiced ease. The sky burned orange and pink, and for a moment everything felt surreal. Just them, the sea, and the slow, rhythmic motion of the waves. Mark dove beneath the surface, his body cutting smoothly through the water. He had always felt at home in the ocean, drawn to its silence, its weightless embrace. As he swam deeper, he marveled at the life around him. Vibrant coral formations, darting fish, and the way the fading sunlight danced in shimmering ripples along the sea floor. Then he saw it. A shadow moved in the depths, slow, deliberate. His chest tightened. It was large, too large to be anything but a predator. At this moment, his heartbeat quickened. At first, there was a quick motion, then followed by a powerful impact. Lisa was the one who took the hit. She jerked violently but disappeared beneath the surface before she could even scream. Mark surged upward, his instincts overriding the shock. Lisa reappeared, her arms flailing, a look of sheer panic in her wide, terrified eyes. Blood billowed into the water, unfurling like ink in the fading light. Then he saw it. The shark's massive head breached the surface, its black eyes expressionless, its jaws still clamped around Lisa's leg. The sheer size of it was staggering, easily 15 feet long, its gray body sleek and powerful. The water churned with its thrashing, foam and blood mixing in a sickening swirl. Lisa struggled, her fingers clawing at the empty air as the shark pulled her under again. Mark didn't think. He dove. The water stung his eyes, turning red with Lisa's blood. The shark's body moved like a nightmare, smooth and unstoppable. Mark reached for his diving knife, his grip steady despite the panic clawing at his mind. He kicked hard, propelling himself toward the predator. The shark shook Lisa violently, its jaws grinding bone. She fought weakly, her movements growing sluggish. With all his strength, Mark drove the knife into the shark's side, feeling the resistance of thick muscle. The reaction was instant. The great white released Lisa, twisting violently, its massive tail slamming into Mark's chest and sending him tumbling backward. The force knocked the air from his lungs, pain radiating through his ribs. Lisa drifted downward, her body limp, her blood leaving a crimson trail in the water. Mark forced himself to move, ignoring the burning in his chest and the searing pain in his shoulder where the shark's rough skin had scraped him raw. He reached her, wrapped his arms around her, and kicked toward the surface. Breaking through the waves, he gasped for air, his lungs on fire. Lisa's face was pale, her lips parted, but she was alive. He tightened his grip around her, scanning the water. The shark had disappeared, for now, but the blood in the water would bring it back. Others too, so they had to reach shore. Mark turned toward the distant beach. the waves now feeling impossibly strong. He kicked, pulling Lisa with him, her head resting against his chest. She was losing blood fast. The gash in her leg was deep, the torn flesh exposing raw muscle. Mark pressed a hand over the wound, trying to stem the bleeding, but the salt water made everything slippery. Pain flared in his side. His own injuries were catching up to him. His strength was fading. Every kick felt weaker than the last, his body screaming for rest, but stopping meant death. The shore never seemed to get closer. The water felt heavier, dragging at them, pulling them under. Lisa's breathing was shallow, her body growing colder against his. Mark gritted his teeth, forcing himself forward. He refused to let this be the end. Then, in the distance, a boat was sighted. It was small, a fishing vessel, its white hull barely visible against the darkening horizon. Mark lifted one arm, waving weakly. He had no voice left to call out. His vision blurred. His limbs felt like lead. Luckily, the occupants noticed them and the boat turned toward them. A burst of energy surged through him, one last push. The sound of an engine roared over the waves and hands reached for them, pulling Lisa aboard first, then Mark. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Lisa's face, pale and bloodied, her eyes fluttering open. When he woke, the world was different. He was in a hospital, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. His body ached in places he hadn't even realized was injured. But he was alive. Lisa was alive. The doctors told them they had been rescued just in time. Lisa had lost a dangerous amount of blood, but they had stabilized her. Mark had suffered deep lacerations and cracked ribs, but he would recover. Later, they learned the truth. The waters around the island had seen increased shark activity in recent months, drawn closer to shore by illegal fishing operations that had disrupted the natural balance. The locals had known something was wrong, and they had warned them. They just hadn't listened. Their honeymoon had become something else entirely. Not a dream, but a story of survival. A reminder that nature did not bend to human will, that the ocean was both breathtaking and merciless. Mark would never forget the weight of the knife in his hand, the cold press of Lisa's blood against his skin, and the way the water had darkened with the predator's shadow. And neither of them would ever swim in the open sea again. The water was warm, the kind that made the ocean feel more like an extension of the body than something separate. Daniel Foster moved effortlessly, each slow kick of his fins gliding him deeper into the blue. Below him stretched the vast reef, a sprawling world of coral heads and sea fans swaying in the current. Shafts of sunlight cut through the water, dappling the reef with shifting light, illuminating fish in bursts of color. It was the kind of dive that made everything else feel small. Just a man and the endless sea, weightless and free. Daniel had spent years pushing the limits of free diving, testing how long his body could exist in this silent world. Every descent was a lesson in control, in knowing how to listen to his heartbeat, how to slow it until his body required less oxygen, stretching the moment longer. He was aware of everything. The slight burn in his muscles, the pressure in his chest, and the instinctive urge to breathe suppressed by sheer will. He had learned long ago that fear had no place here. The ocean did not tolerate hesitation. He was 50 feet down the coast of Fiji when he noticed the change. The fish, abundant just seconds ago, scattered in a frantic blur, darting into crevices in the coral, vanishing into the depths. The silence of the water remained unchanged, but Daniel knew better. He had seen this before. It was nature's warning. Something was near. Then, out of the deep, the tiger shark materialized. It came from below, rising like a phantom from the darkness, its massive body moving with the eerie, unhurried grace of a true predator. 15 feet of muscle and raw instinct, its stripes barely visible against the shifting light. It circled once, slow and deliberate, watching. Daniel knew the drill. Stay calm, make himself appear large, avoid erratic movements. The shark had likely been curious at first, drawn in by the vibrations of his movements. But curiosity could shift to something else in an instant. His lungs burned, telling him it was time to surface. He began his ascent, moving in slow, controlled strokes, careful not to trigger the shark's predatory response. The creature followed. Its body twisted effortlessly, moving just beneath him now, shadowing his rise. The water between them grew thinner. He was nearly halfway up when the shark changed course. A shift, a flick of its tail. Then it came. The impact was explosive. The force of the hit sent a shockwave through his body. And then the pain, unlike anything he had ever known, blossomed in his thigh, sharp and consuming. The shark's jaws had clamped down, its teeth shearing through flesh and muscle, crushing bone. The water erupted in a red haze, thick and billowing, spreading through the blue like ink. The pain should have paralyzed him, but survival was a powerful thing. Instinct took over. His hand struck blindly at the shark's head, hitting its snout and eyes, but the grip tightened. His leg was trapped in its serrated teeth. He aimed for the gills, using all his strength, but the shark thrashed, dragging him deeper, jerking his body violently. His vision blurred. The blood loss, the pressure, the lack of oxygen. It was all hitting at once. His chest screamed for air, his mind beginning to fray at the edges. His knife. It was on his calf, the leg inside the shark's jaws. He reached for it, fingers scraping against the handle, slipping. Another thrash sent him spiraling, the world spinning in a dizzying, dreamlike blur. The pain was distant now, his body slipping into shock, but the cold grip of reality remained. He was losing. He clawed at the shark's rough skin, trying to force himself up, trying to reach something, anything to break free. His hands found the shark's eye, pressing into the socket, driving his thumb deep. A final act of defiance. The shark recoiled, its body twisting. Then, as quickly as it had attacked, it let go. But the damage had been done. Daniel's body floated in the churning water, his vision dimming, his limbs numb. The surface was too far. His strength was gone. The ocean around him darkened, his blood still seeping into the current, marking him, making him part of the sea. His lungs burned, the desperate need for air now an unbearable fire in his chest. He kicked weakly, but the effort was futile. His body was shutting down, his mind slipping away. The last thing he saw was the endless blue stretching above him, just out of reach. Then, nothing. When the search team found his gear the next day, it was torn, shredded, adrift on the surface like remnants of a lost battle. His dive watch, still ticking, was crusted with dried salt. The straps sliced clean through. His fins, one missing, floated near the reef, caught in the delicate branches of coral. His dive knife, still strapped to his calf, lay untouched. Of Daniel, there was nothing. Only the sea remained, vast and indifferent, erasing all traces of the struggle that had taken place in its. The morning sun painted the ocean in streaks of gold as the Thompson family boarded a small tour boat, their excitement mirroring the restless shimmer of the waves. The air was thick with the scent of salt, and the rhythmic crashing of distant surf against the shore filled the air with a steady, soothing hum. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the vast blue sky. It was the kind of day that felt untouched by anything but beauty, where danger seemed like a distant concept that happened in stories, never in moments like these. Rachel and Mark had planned this trip for months, eager to give their children, Emma and Luke, an adventure to remember. South Africa's coastline was breathtaking, and its waters were teeming with life. They had chosen this boat tour specifically to snorkel in the warm shallows. The captain assured them it was safe. The reefs were full of vibrant fish, and the water was clear and inviting. There was nothing to fear. They anchored a short distance from shore, where the sea stretched in endless rolling swells. The sunburnt guide gestured toward the designated snorkeling area, calm turquoise water framed by distant cliffs. With the reassurance of safety, the family eagerly prepared, slipping into wetsuits, adjusting their masks. When they finally entered the water, the cool embrace of the ocean was refreshing, its vastness exhilarating rather than intimidating. Rachel was the first to drift further from the boat, drawn by the sight of a school of shimmering fish flickering in the sunlight below. The water was so clear she could see the sandy bottom far beneath her, dotted with coral and dark patches of seaweed swaying with the currents. She floated effortlessly, listening to the muffled sounds of her breathing through the snorkel, lulled by the slow, hypnotic movement of the water. She never saw it. 18 feet of raw muscle and power cut through the depths, its shadow merging seamlessly with the blue abyss below. The great white shark had been circling for some time, drawn by the vibrations, by the erratic splashing of unfamiliar bodies in its domain. It had not attacked immediately. It had studied, it had waited, and now it struck. The force was unimaginable. Rachel never even had the chance to scream. The impact sent shockwaves through the water as the shark's massive jaws closed around her torso, its serrated teeth carving effortlessly through flesh and bone. The water exploded in a bloom of red as her body was wrenched violently downward, the world above slipping away in a blur of churning bubbles and blood. Mark turned just in time to see his wife disappear beneath the waves. For a moment, his mind refused to process what had just happened. And then instinct took over. He lunged forward, kicking hard, his arms outstretched as if he could pull her back from the abyss. The shark was already turning. Rachel was still locked in its grip, her body limp, but the predator's hunger was not sated. It released her momentarily, repositioning its jaws for another bite, and in that instant, Mark reached her. His hands closed around her wrist, his mind screaming for this not to be real, for this nightmare to snap back into the idyllic morning it had been just moments ago. Then the shadow moved again. The shark surged upward with terrifying speed, its mouth gaping. Mark had no time to react before it slammed into him, knocking him back. For a heartbeat, he was weightless, and the impact sent him tumbling through the water. But the predator was relentless. The second bite took him. Its jaws locked around his leg, yanking him downward with terrifying power. The pain was instant, searing, but the force was worse. The feeling of being utterly powerless against something so massive, so unstoppable. He thrashed, his vision filling with the murky, blood-filled water, his lungs already burning from lack of air. But there was no fighting this. The shark twisted, its powerful body rolling, and Mark felt the sickening snap before he even registered the agony. From the surface, Emma and Luke saw none of this. They only saw the spreading red in the water. Their mother was gone. Their father was disappearing. The world was collapsing around them. Panic overtook reason as they thrashed toward the boat, their hands grasping at empty water. The guide shouted and waved for them to swim and move fast, but terror had already made them clumsy. Their splashing was frantic and erratic, and that was what sealed their fate. The shark, still in a feeding frenzy, sensed the vibrations, the chaotic energy of struggling prey. It abandoned what remained of Mark, its black, lifeless eyes locking onto the next target. Emma was the first to feel it, a sudden crushing force around her waist, the world tilting as she was ripped beneath the waves. There was no time for thought, only the raw, primal understanding that she was being taken. She reached out unquestioningly, her fingers grazing Luke's outstretched hand for the briefest second before she was yanked away, her body vanishing into the dark. Luke's scream was lost in the roar of the ocean. He spun wildly, his eyes darting in every direction, searching for her, for anything, but the water was empty. Emma was gone. Then it was his turn. The massive head emerged from below, the shark's jaws snapping closed with unthinkable power. The last thing he saw was the sun, distorted through the water's surface, shimmering like a fading memory. The ocean returned to silence. By the time the rescue boats arrived, the carnage was already over. The water was eerily still, and the only evidence of the horror that had unfolded was a few shredded pieces of wetsuit drifting in the current. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a vast, endless sea stretching toward the horizon as if nothing had happened. The shark had vanished, retreating into the deep, its hunger satisfied. Its behavior was illogical, without cruelty or malice. It was just nature, unfeeling and absolute. The Thompsons were gone. Their names filled headlines, their tragedy retold in warning tales of the dangers lurking beneath the waves. But the ocean doesn't even remember them. The sky above Queensland, Australia stretched wide and endless, a brilliant blue without a single cloud to break its expanse. The afternoon sun shimmered over the Pacific, where the water sparkled like crushed glass. Jason Reed soared high above it all, strapped into his paragliding harness, the colorful parachute billowing above him. The ocean stretched out below, vast and inviting, its gentle swells rolling toward the golden shoreline. It had been a perfect day, one of those rare moments that felt almost surreal, as if the world had paused to grant him this single, weightless experience. The wind carried him effortlessly, lifting him higher one moment, dipping him slightly the next. Below, tiny figures gathered along the beach, their heads tilted upward, watching as he floated against the sky. The resort had promised an unforgettable experience, and it had delivered. Jason had never felt more alive than he did in that moment, high above the waves, the salty air filling his lungs. The world laid out before him in every direction. Then the wind shifted. It wasn't a gradual change, not a subtle shift in currents that he could adjust to. It came suddenly, violently, a powerful gust that sent his parachute to the side. His body jerked in the harness, his stomach twisting as he felt himself being dragged downward. The calm, steady ride turned into a wild descent, his feet skimming the air as he plummeted closer to the waves. From the shore, spectators gasped as the parachute struggled against the shifting air. The colorful canopy buckled and flapped, unable to hold its shape. Jason yanked at the control lines to correct and steady himself, but the wind had other plans. He was no longer in control. The ocean rushed toward him closer and closer, the waves no longer distant and serene but immediate and menacing. The partially inflated parachute dragged behind him, its trailing rope skimming the water's surface. The struggle of fabric against waves created a chaotic spray, the parachute's colors thrashing wildly, as if it were a wounded creature caught in the sea's grip. Then the water exploded. It happened so fast that those watching from the shore barely registered the shape emerging from the deep. A monstrous, sleek, white form shot from beneath the surface, its powerful body slicing through the air with terrifying precision. The sunlight caught the ridges of its snout, the black, lifeless eyes, and the massive, gaping jaws lined with rows of jagged teeth. Jason had no time to react. The great white shark struck like a missile, its momentum carrying it upward in a perfect, calculated attack. The force was beyond comprehension when its jaws clamped onto his leg. A brutal, crushing pressure enveloped him. And then he was no longer descending. He was being ripped sideways, torn from the harness as if he weighed nothing at all. His body wrenched violently as the harness snapped, the sudden shift sending a sickening jolt through every nerve. Pain erupted in his leg, unbearable and deep, as the shark's teeth punctured flesh and crushed bone with ease. His mind barely had time to process the agony before the two of them, the predator and its prey, were airborne together, still rising as the sheer force of the attack carried them further into the sky. For a fraction of a second he was weightless, suspended between the sea and sky, trapped in the impossible moment of horror. Blood sprayed in the air, misting the sunlight with a crimson haze. The shark's body twisted midair, muscles coiling in perfect, deadly synchronization. Then gravity reclaimed them. They crashed into the ocean, the impact sending a towering wave outward from where they struck. The water swallowed them whole, closing over them like the surface had never been disturbed. The ocean, once so inviting, had become a battleground of survival. Jason barely knew which way was up. His ears rang from the impact, his vision blurred by the churning water and the cloud of his blood. The shark had not let go. It dragged him deeper, twisting its massive body in a ferocious attempt to tear him apart. His limbs flailed, instinct forcing him to fight, but the strength in his body was nothing compared to the monstrous force latched onto him. The shark shook its head violently, the movement sending shockwaves of pain through his shattered leg. The pressure was unbearable, his body wrenched in directions never meant to bend. Darkness surrounded him, the light above growing fainter as he was pulled into the depths. His lungs burned and his mind screamed for oxygen, but there was none. Only the sea's crushing force and the predator's relentless pull. Above, the spectators stood frozen, the cheers of moments ago now replaced by horrified silence. The parachute, still adrift, floated on the water's surface, its once bright colors now marred by streaks of red. Rescue boats launched from the shore, slicing through the waves at full speed. Their engines roared as they raced toward the spot where Jason had vanished. The water was still bubbling with the remnants of the violent struggle below, but the ocean gave no answers. The minutes stretched on. The boats circled, their crews scanning the surface for any sign of movement, any glimpse of a body breaking through the waves. There was nothing. Only the wreckage of the parachute remained, its torn fabric drifting aimlessly, tugged by the tide. The once bustling shoreline had fallen silent, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on everyone who had witnessed it. Jason Reed was gone. The great white had disappeared into the abyss, retreating with its prize to the silent, endless blue. As it always did, the ocean swallowed the struggle, smoothing over the chaos until it was as if nothing had ever happened. The rescue boats remained on the water long after hope had faded, searching, waiting, though they knew nothing was left to find. The first light of morning stretched across the South African coastline, casting a golden hue over the rolling surf. The steady and unbroken tide moved with an ancient rhythm, whispering across the shore where David Miller stood, his feet sinking slightly into the cool, damp sand. He breathed deeply, the crisp scent of salt filling his lungs, the air tinged with the faint cries of distant gulls. Behind him, his wife Lisa sat cross-legged on a beach towel, her fingers absent-mindedly smoothing the fabric as she watched their two children, still bundled in blankets, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The morning held a quiet stillness, untouched by the rush of the day. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, a vast expanse of shifting blues and greens, its surface rippling beneath the gentle breeze. It had always been like this, calm, inviting, and deceptively serene. David had spent much of his life by the water, drawn to its vastness, its mystery. Even now he felt the same childlike thrill he had known in summers past, those endless days of body surfing, salt drying on his skin, and waves carrying him weightlessly toward the shore. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, feeling the cool embrace of the sea around his ankles. The sand shifted beneath his feet as he waded deeper, the water rising past his knees and then his waist. A shiver ran through him, but he welcomed it, pushing further into the surf. The waves rolled toward him, lifting his body and carrying him forward before gently setting him down again. It was a feeling he had always loved. Weightlessness, surrendering to the tide. Farther out, where the water darkened, An unseen predator moved. The great white shark, 18 feet of muscle and instinct, glided effortlessly through the depths. It had been hunting just beyond the reef, following the scent of seals, its black eyes scanning the endless blue. But now something new had entered its domain. Something large, moving differently than its usual prey. The vibrations pulsing through the water. The unfamiliar scent, enough to stir something deep within the creature's ancient instincts. David continued forward, reveling in the freedom of the open water. He floated momentarily, letting the tide gently rock him, oblivious to the presence below. The great white adjusted its course, its movement slow, deliberate, circling beneath the surface. It could sense the thrumming of a heartbeat, the pulse of blood moving through fragile veins. There was no hesitation, no malice, only the unrelenting force of nature at work. The shark coiled, its powerful tail propelling it upward, closing the distance between itself and the figure above. Lisa glanced up from where she sat on the beach, her gaze shifting toward the water. An unease flickered into her chest, though she couldn't find its source. David was still visible, his form bobbing among the waves, his arms outstretched as he drifted with the tide. But something felt off. Before she could fully process the thought, the ocean erupted in an explosion of white foam and red spray. The impact was devastating, a violent collision of flesh and force. One moment David was there, his body rising with the waves. The next he was airborne, lifted clear of the water as the shark struck with terrifying speed. A guttural, instinctive scream tore through Lisa's throat as she watched her husband's body twist violently, his limbs flailing. Then in an instant the sea swallowed him whole. Pain, unlike anything he had ever known, seared through David's body as the shark's jaws clamped down, serrated teeth puncturing deep into his waist. His mind barely had time to register what was happening before the creature shook him with brutal force. A sickening crunch reverberated through his frame, ribs snapping like dry twigs beneath the pressure. The ocean around him turned red, warm, and thick, clouding his vision as he thrashed against the immense power pulling him downward. His muscles screamed for him to fight, but the pain was blinding, suffocating. His lungs burned, his throat raw from the salt water rushing in. The shark adjusted its grip, releasing for the briefest second before biting down again, dragging him deeper. Instinct kicked in, the primal urge to survive overpowering the agony. His arms shot upward, fingers clawing at the water, reaching for the surface. Above, Lisa and the children stood frozen, horror locking their bodies in place. Lifeguards sprinted down the shoreline, their movements frantic, their shouts barely audible over the crash of waves. People gathered, drawn by the commotion, their voices rising in panicked murmurs. But no one could do anything. For one brief, fleeting moment, David's head broke the surface. His chest convulsed, muscles spasming as he gasped for air, his mouth filling with salt and blood. The sun glared at him, impossibly bright, the world above so close yet utterly unreachable. His arms shot skyward, fingers stretching desperately toward life, toward the air, toward Lisa and the children watching helplessly from the shore. Then the shark yanked him under in a single fluid motion. The force was inescapable, a pull of raw, unyielding power. Darkness consumed him as the water grew colder and heavier. His body screamed for oxygen. His chest tightened as he convulsed against the inevitable. Above him the sun became a distorted shimmer, a warped, unreachable dream. His hand, still reaching, still pleading, was the last thing to disappear. Lisa saw the final glimpse of his fingers before they slipped beneath the surface and were swallowed by the vast, indifferent sea. The lifeguards dove into the water, their strokes sharp and powerful, but they knew. They knew even before they reached the spot where the water had turned crimson. No struggle left, no desperate splashing, no sign of him. Only the retreating shadow below, a massive form vanishing into the abyss, its hunger sated, its presence leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Lisa collapsed to her knees, the sand biting into her skin, but she didn't feel it. The children clung to her, their faces streaked with tears, their small hands shaking as they buried themselves against her. The ocean stretched before them, unfeeling, endless. The waves rolled in and out, washing away the evidence of what had happened as if the sea wished to erase the moment. Minutes passed, then an hour. The rescue boats combed the water and the lifeguards scoured the shoreline, but nothing happened. There was no trace, only the empty horizon, stretching endlessly, uncaring. By midday, the beach had been closed, and the once bustling shore was now eerily silent. Tourists lingered in uneasy clusters, speaking in hushed, fearful tones, their eyes flickering toward the water as if expecting the monster to rise again. The story spread quickly. A man had been taken and vanished into the depths. Another grim reminder of nature's raw, unmerciful power. Lisa and the children remained on the beach long after the crowd had gone, their eyes locked on the horizon. The tide came and went, the waves lapping gently at the sand, ignorant of their grief. The sun arced across the sky, unbothered by the tragedy that had unfolded beneath its light. And the great white moved on somewhere deep, where the water was cold and eternal. The ocean off the coast of Northern California had always been known for its beauty and danger. The cold, deep waters were home to some of the largest marine predators in the world. Great white sharks, massive and powerful, had dominated these waters for centuries. Scientists had studied them, fishermen had feared them, and divers had admired them from a distance. But on February 2nd, 2025, what was discovered inside one of these predators sent shockwaves through the entire state. That morning, a team of marine researchers from the Pacific Wildlife Institute boarded the Horizon, a research vessel conducting routine tracking of tagged great white sharks. The lead scientist, Dr. Michael Graves, had spent years studying shark migration patterns. Along with his team, marine biologist Rachel Lynn, research assistant Tom Baker, and graduate student Melissa Carter, the group had planned to collect data on a shark that had been tagged 2 months earlier. This particular shark was of great interest because it was unusually large, measuring 23 feet long, one of the biggest they had ever recorded in the area. The day started like any other. The crew left the harbor at sunrise, the cold wind cutting across the deck as they navigated toward the tracking signal. They followed the global positioning system coordinates, leading them about 12 miles offshore. The tracking device showed movement, but something was off. The shark was not moving as it should have been. It was staying in one location, deeper than normal. As they got closer, a call came over the radio. A nearby fishing vessel, the Blue Horizon, had reported a massive great white shark tangled in their nets. The fishermen were struggling to free it, and they needed assistance. Dr. Graves and his team immediately changed course. When they arrived at the scene, they saw the shark, a monstrous figure thrashing weakly against the tangled lines. The fishermen, led by Captain Luis Mendoza and his crew, looked exhausted. They had tried cutting parts of the net, but the weight of the shark made it nearly impossible to release. After hours of struggle, the combined efforts of the fishermen and researchers finally brought the great white to the surface. It was dying, its movements slow, its gills barely moving. Dr. Graves decided to haul it onto the Horizon for examination. It was rare to get such a close look at a shark of this size, and they needed to understand what had caused its strange behavior. As soon as the shark was secured on deck, Rachel began inspecting its body. There were no visible injuries and no signs of illness, but something was strange. The stomach was bloated and unnaturally distended. The shark had eaten recently, and whatever was inside was large. Melissa, eager but nervous, stood next to Tom as they prepared to make the first incision. With precision, Rachel started cutting on the shark's belly. The moment the blade sliced through, a foul, overwhelming stench filled the air. The crew recoiled, covering their mouths. Then, the horror began. The first thing they saw was fabric. A torn wetsuit, partially digested but unmistakable. Then, tangled within the mass, a human arm. Rachel stepped back, her face pale. Dr. Graves ordered the team to continue. They had to know what was inside. As they removed more, the truth became undeniable. There were bodies, not one but 3. The crew fell into stunned silence. The realization hit hard. These were not just remains. They were people who had been alive just days ago. Tom, his hand shaking, helped lift out the first body. The wetsuit, though damaged, still had markings from a known diving company. Blue Reef Expeditions, a popular tour operator. Dr. Graves immediately made the connection. 2 weeks earlier, 3 female divers had gone missing during a deep-sea diving trip. Their disappearance had been a mystery, until now. Rachel identified the remains of the second and third bodies, confirming what they feared. These were the missing women. Their names were Susan Palmer, 33, an experienced diver from Seattle; Angela Rodriguez, 29, a marine photography student from San Diego; and Heather Collins, 35, a travel blogger from Texas. They had set out on a routine dive, but something had gone terribly wrong. Back on land, authorities had been searching for weeks. The dive boat had reported them missing after they failed to resurface. Initial searches found no sign of them, no equipment, no distress signals, nothing. Now the answers lay within the stomach of this enormous predator. The shock spread quickly. Law enforcement, forensic specialists, and media crews arrived at the dock as the horizon returned. Deoxyribonucleic acid testing confirmed the identities of the women, and an investigation was launched into what exactly had happened on the day of their disappearance. Speculation ran wild. Had the women been attacked directly, or had they drowned and been scavenged by the shark afterward? Forensic experts examined the remains, trying to determine whether the bites had occurred before or after death. While some experts believed the shark had simply consumed the bodies after they had already perished, others were not so sure. The sheer size of the shark and the way the bodies were found suggested an aggressive attack. The families of the victims were devastated. They had held on to hope that their loved ones would be found alive. Instead, they were left with an unthinkable truth. The discovery forced authorities to reconsider safety measures for diving expeditions in known shark-inhabited waters. Blue Reef Expeditions was temporarily shut down as investigators questioned the crew. Had there been negligence? Had safety protocols been ignored? Meanwhile, the scientific community debated what had led to such an event. Great white sharks were known to be opportunistic hunters, but attacks of this scale were rare. Dr. Graves and his team continued analyzing the tracking tag data. They discovered something chilling. The shark had remained in the same general area for days after the divers went missing. It had not migrated as expected. Instead, it had stayed feeding. The case remained open, with many questions left unanswered. But one thing was certain. On that day, the ocean had revealed a darkness that few had ever witnessed. The waters of Northern California would never feel the same again. The ocean off the coast of California had always been a place of beauty and danger. The deep blue waters stretched for miles, home to an incredible range of marine life. It was also one of the most well-known great white shark territories in the world. Scientists had studied these predators for years, tracking their movements, trying to understand their behavior. For most people, the idea of encountering one was terrifying. But for Ryan Holt, the risk was part of the adventure. On March 12, 2024, Ryan, a 27-year-old outdoor enthusiast and live streamer, set out for what was supposed to be just another routine kayaking trip. He had been sharing his experiences online for years, building a dedicated following of viewers who loved watching him navigate the ocean. He had paddled through rough waters, explored hidden coves, and even encountered dolphins and sea lions. His fans enjoyed the peacefulness of his streams, the way he made them feel like they were right there with him. That morning, Ryan woke up early in his small apartment in Santa Cruz, California. He packed his gear, checked his kayak, and made sure his GoPro and phone were fully charged. He had been planning this trip for weeks, excited to explore a remote part of the coastline. The conditions were perfect. Clear skies, calm waters, and just enough breeze to keep the heat down. By 10 a.m., Ryan was already on the water, his red kayak gliding smoothly across the surface. He adjusted his camera, making sure his stream was live. Thousands of viewers had already tuned in, watching as he paddled past the cliffs and into the open ocean. He talked to them as he moved, answering questions, pointing out wildlife, and sharing his thoughts. It was peaceful, exactly what he had hoped for. But then everything changed. About an hour into his journey, Ryan noticed something strange. The water beneath him darkened in a way that didn't feel normal. He stopped paddling, letting his kayak drift. At first he thought it might be a shadow from the clouds, but there were no clouds above him. His stomach tightened. He had spent enough time on the water to know when something wasn't right. Then he saw it. A massive shape moved just below the surface. It was slow at first, gliding effortlessly beneath him. Ryan's heart pounded. He angled his camera down, trying to capture the movement. The chat on his stream exploded. Some viewers thought it was a whale. Others immediately recognized what it was, a great white shark. And not just any shark. It was huge. Ryan kept his paddle still, barely breathing. He had seen sharks before, but this one was different. It wasn't just passing by. It was watching him. Then, without warning, the shark turned. It circled once, then again, moving closer each time. Ryan whispered to himself, trying to stay calm. His audience could hear the fear creeping into his voice. The chat was moving too fast to read now, filled with warnings, prayers, and disbelief. Then the shark charged. Ryan barely had time to react. The massive predator surged forward, ramming the side of his kayak with unbelievable force. The impact sent a shockwave through his body, nearly flipping him over. His paddle flew from his hands, landing a few feet away. Panic took over. His breathing became rapid, his hands shaking as he reached for his paddle. The shark wasn't leaving. It circled again, faster this time. Ryan knew he had to move, but every muscle in his body was frozen. The chat was flooded with messages. People were screaming through their keyboards, begging him to stay calm, to get out of there, to do something. Ryan grabbed his paddle and tried to move, but the shark wasn't finished. It lunged again, this time coming up from beneath. The force lifted the kayak slightly, making it wobble. Then, the worst thing happened. Ryan lost his balance. His kayak tipped and he fell into the water. A collective gasp erupted from his live audience. The screen shook as his camera slipped from its mount, plunging into the ocean with him. The view became chaotic. Water, bubbles, splashes. His breathing was loud and erratic. Ryan surfaced, gasping for air. His kayak floated a few feet away, just out of reach. He turned, trying to spot the shark. It was there. The massive great white circled him like a hunter playing with its prey. Ryan screamed, "Please don't eat me, please don't let this be the end." His words echoed across the stream, reaching thousands of people who could do nothing but watch in horror. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He kicked, trying to stay afloat, trying to get closer to his kayak. Then the shark moved in. It charged again, its massive body cutting through the water with terrifying speed. Ryan braced himself, expecting the worst. But then a horn blasted through the air. A boat. A small fishing vessel had been nearby. The captain, Miguel Alvarez, had been monitoring his radio when he heard Ryan's distress. He and his deckhand, Lucas Romero, had immediately turned toward the coordinates. Miguel pushed the throttle to full speed, aiming straight for Ryan. The shark hesitated. The boat was loud, disrupting the water. Miguel steered as close as he could, shouting for Ryan to grab onto the side. Ryan didn't think, he just moved. He swam with everything he had, his arms burning, his legs barely able to keep him above water. The shark circled one last time, but the boat was too close now. It turned sharply and disappeared into the deep. Lucas reached over, grabbing Ryan by the arm and hauling him onto the deck. He collapsed, his body shaking, his chest heaving. He was alive. The stream was still going. Thousands of viewers watched as Ryan lay there, his hands covering his face, his body drenched and trembling. The chat was filled with relief, shock, and overwhelming support. Miguel turned the boat toward shore. Ryan sat up, looking back at the water. His kayak was gone, lost to the waves. The ocean had nearly taken him, and in that moment he realized he would never look at it the same way again. The video of his escape spread fast. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. The clip of his desperate plea, "Please don't let this be the end," was replayed over and over. For Ryan Holt, the ocean had always been a place of adventure. But on that day, it became something else, something he would never forget. The Pacific Ocean off the coast of California had always been a critical training ground for the United States Navy. Its vast, unpredictable waters provided the perfect setting for exercises that prepared officers for real-life combat and survival situations. The area was known for strong currents, deep trenches, and a diverse marine ecosystem. It was also home to one of the ocean's most feared predators, the great white shark. For decades, the presence of these massive creatures had been noted by researchers and military personnel alike, but no one expected what would happen on May 6, 2024. That morning, Lieutenant David Parker and his team prepared for a scheduled dive training session near San Clemente Island, a location frequently used by the United States Navy for underwater navigation drills. David, a 34-year-old officer with years of diving experience, had been through countless exercises like this before. His role was to lead a team of 4 divers: Chief Petty Officer Eric Vaughn, Petty Officer Second Class James Riley, Seaman First Class Robert Hayes, and Petty Officer First Class Matthew Clark. The group had trained together for months, trusting each other with their lives. The day had started like any other. The crew boarded their vessel, United States ship Barracuda, and reviewed their objectives. The mission was straightforward: conduct a deep-water dive, practice emergency resurfacing maneuvers, and test new communication equipment. The weather was clear, and the water was calm, ideal conditions for their session. After a final check of their gear, the men suited up, securing their oxygen tanks and strapping on their fins. The cold water wrapped around them as they descended, their bodies adjusting to the pressure with each meter they dropped. David led the way, keeping his team in formation as they moved toward the seabed. The underwater environment was dark despite the sunlight filtering through the surface. Visibility was limited, but the team remained focused. Schools of fish darted past them, and every so often, a shadow of a larger marine creature would pass in the distance. Everything seemed normal. About 20 minutes into the dive, the team reached the designated depth. They activated their navigation equipment, running drills and testing communication lines back to the boat. Their breathing was steady, their movements synchronized. Then, without warning, something changed. The ocean around them felt different. A disturbance in the water sent vibrations through their bodies. The first to notice was Matthew Clark, who signaled to David, indicating movement in the distance. David turned his head, his eyes scanning the area. At first, there was nothing but open water, but then a shadow emerged from the deep. It was enormous. Before the team could react, the creature came into full view. A massive great white shark, at least 20 feet long, glided toward them. Its size was overwhelming, its movements slow but deliberate. It did not behave like the smaller sharks they had seen before. This one was hunting. David signaled to his team to remain calm and stay close. Training had taught them that sudden movements could provoke an attack. But as the shark continued its approach, its intent became clear. It was not just passing through. It was locked onto them. The team barely had time to prepare before the attack began. With terrifying speed, the great white lunged forward. Its jaws, lined with razor-sharp teeth, clamped down on David's leg, sinking deep into his flesh. The force was immediate and unbearable. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to free himself, but the shark's grip was relentless. A cloud of blood erupted in the water, reducing visibility for the rest of the team. David's scream, though muffled by the ocean, was heard through the communication device. His team sprang into action, their instincts overriding their fear. Eric Vaughn, the most experienced diver after David, grabbed his diving knife and rushed toward the shark. He stabbed at its side, aiming for the sensitive gills, hoping to force it to release its grip. James Riley and Robert Hayes joined in, using their dive tools to strike at the predator. The shark, momentarily distracted, loosened its hold. David, though barely conscious from the pain, kicked with what strength he had left, forcing himself free. But the danger was far from over. The shark, enraged by the resistance, turned its attention toward the others. It thrashed violently, its powerful tail sending shockwaves through the water. The team knew they had to get David to the surface fast. His leg was severely damaged, and the loss of blood was worsening by the second. Eric signaled to the team to initiate an emergency ascent. They gripped David tightly, pulling him upward as quickly as they could without causing decompression sickness. The shark did not give up easily. It circled them once more, watching, waiting for another opportunity to strike. The ascent felt like an eternity. David's vision blurred, his body growing weak. The cold of the ocean seeped deeper into his bones, threatening to pull him into unconsciousness, but his team refused to let him go. They pushed upward with everything they had, their lungs burning from the rapid movement. As they neared the surface, the outline of United States ship Barracuda came into view. Crew members aboard had already seen the disturbance below and were preparing to assist. The moment David broke the surface, hands reached down, pulling him aboard. The team scrambled onto the deck, their bodies shaking and their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Medics rushed to David's side, pressing bandages against his wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. His leg was mangled, the tissue torn beyond recognition. His pulse was weak, his skin pale. The radio crackled as the crew called for an emergency airlift. A helicopter was already en route. Minutes later, the sound of rotor blades filled the air. The medics worked frantically as they lifted David onto the stretcher. His teammates stood in silence, their bodies still trembling from the encounter. David had entered the water as a leader, strong and confident. Now he was being airlifted away, barely holding on to life. His attack sent shockwaves through the Navy. leading to immediate evaluations of training exercises in known shark territory. Great whites had always been present in California's waters, but this level of aggression had never been seen before. The military, known for its control over extreme environments, had faced a force it could not predict or stop. David's survival was uncertain as he was flown to the hospital. His team, exhausted and shaken, watched the helicopter disappear into the sky, knowing that none of them would ever forget what had happened beneath the waves that day.